Rome, 367 AD. Bishop Athanasius sits at his desk, candlelight flickering across his weathered face as he composes what will become one of Christianity's most consequential letters. His hand trembles slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what he's about to command. He's ordering the destruction of books. Not just any books, but gospels that millions of Christians have cherished for centuries. Among them is a text so dangerous, so revolutionary in its claims about Jesus Christ, that its very existence threatens to tear apart everything the church has built. This gospel doesn't speak of Jesus as a suffering servant who dies for humanity's sins. Instead, it reveals a laughing Christ, a divine trickster who mocks his executioners from beyond their comprehension, who shares secret knowledge with his closest disciples, knowledge so powerful it promises to transform believers into something the church fathers could never accept: gods themselves. The Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip. These names might sound familiar if you've wandered down internet rabbit holes about Christian history, but there's one that stands apart, one that struck such fear into the hearts of early church leaders that they devoted entire treatises to dismantling it, one that was so thoroughly suppressed that it vanished from human knowledge for over 1,500 years. The Secret Book of John, or as scholars call it, the Apocryphon of John. This isn't a story about conspiracy theories or sensationalist claims. This is about a real text, recovered from the Egyptian desert in 1945, that reveals a version of Christianity so radically different from what we know today that it forces us to ask, what if the winners of history's theological battles simply wrote a different story than the one millions of early Christians believed? Before we go further, quick question for all of you watching. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now, and what time is it there? I'm always fascinated to see how history brings people together across time zones. Drop your location and time in the comments. And if you're finding this deep dive into forgotten history valuable, I'd be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving a super thanks. It genuinely helps Professor Archive continue bringing you these stories that mainstream history often overlooks. Now let's descend into the mystery. December 1945. Near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman is digging for fertilizer near a massive boulder. His shovel strikes something hard, a sealed earthenware jar nearly 3 feet tall. Muhammad hesitates. Local folklore warns that such jars might contain jinn, malevolent spirits. But poverty makes men brave, and he thinks it might also contain gold. He smashes the jar. Instead of treasure or demons, he finds books. 13 leather-bound codices, their pages made of papyrus written in Coptic, the language of ancient Egypt. Muhammad has no idea he's just made one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. He takes them home, where his mother, illiterate and practical, uses several pages to kindle the family's cooking fire. Divine revelation, literally going up in smoke. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Within weeks, Muhammad and his brothers are involved in a blood feud. They murder a man, and fearing police searches of their home, Muhammad asks a local priest to hide some of the books. The priest shows them to his brother-in-law, a traveling teacher who recognizes their potential value. Soon, the codices scatter across Egypt's black market. The Department of Antiquities manages to secure most of them, but one complete codex makes it to America, where a Dutch dealer tries to sell it to various universities. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, receives one as a birthday gift. These aren't just old books. These are time capsules from a branch of Christianity that was systematically erased from existence. The Secret Book of John appears 4 times among the Nag Hammadi texts, in different versions, which tells us something crucial. This wasn't some obscure fringe document. This was a text copied, recopied, and distributed widely enough that multiple editions survived. When scholars finally translated it, they discovered something that explained why the Church Fathers had fought so desperately to suppress it. The text begins innocently enough, with John, the son of Zebedee, one of Jesus' closest disciples, grieving after the crucifixion. He's walking to the temple when he encounters a Pharisee who mocks him. "Where is your teacher, the one you followed?" John flees into the wilderness, consumed by questions. Why did the Messiah suffer? Why did God permit it? And then reality breaks open. The heavens open, the earth shakes, and a figure appears before John. Not a man, but something that shifts between forms. Sometimes it's a child, sometimes an old man, sometimes pure light. The figure speaks. John, John, why do you doubt? I am the Father, I am the Mother, I am the Son. This isn't the Jesus of the canonical Gospels. This is something far stranger, far more cosmic. And then this divine presence begins to teach John secrets about the true nature of reality, secrets that overturn everything Judaism and emerging Christianity taught about God, creation, and humanity's place in the universe. According to the secret book of John, the God described in Genesis, the creator God of the Hebrew Bible, isn't the true God at all. He's a counterfeit, a cosmic mistake named Yaldabaoth, born from the error of a divine being called Sophia, whose name means wisdom. The true God, the real ultimate divine source, exists far beyond this material universe, unknowable, incomprehensible, described only through negation. Not this, not that. This true God emanates a series of divine beings called aeons, forming a celestial realm of pure spirit called the pleroma, the fullness. Sophia is the last of these aeons, and in her desire to create without her divine consort, she gives birth to something monstrous. Yaldabaoth emerges from Sophia's error, a malformed deity with the face of a lion and the body of a serpent, ignorant of the true God's existence. In his arrogance, he declares, I am God, and there is no other God beside me. This is the God of the Old Testament, according to the secret book of John. The jealous God, the God who demands worship, the God who creates the material world. But here's the twist that would have made any second-century church father's blood run cold. This creator God and his subordinate archons or rulers don't create the material universe out of love or goodness. They create it as a prison for humanity, to trap divine sparks of light in bodies of flesh, to keep humans ignorant of their true divine nature. Think about the implications for a moment. Everything the mainstream church was teaching, God as loving creator, the material world as good but fallen, salvation through Christ's death and resurrection, all of it gets inverted. The secret book of John teaches that matter itself is evil, that the body is a cage, and that the serpent in the Garden of Eden, that serpent was actually working for the true God, trying to wake Adam and Eve up from their ignorance, trying to give them knowledge that would free them from Yaldabaoth's tyranny. The fruit wasn't humanity's downfall. It was the first step toward liberation. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like ancient science fiction, and you're not entirely wrong. But tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries believed this. They called themselves Gnostics from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. Not knowledge as in facts and figures, but knowledge as in direct spiritual experience, mystical insight into the true nature of reality. And they weren't a unified group. Gnosticism was more like a spiritual movement, with countless variations, dozens of competing teachers and texts that sometimes contradicted each other wildly. But they shared common threads. The material world is a mistake. Humans contain divine sparks, and salvation comes through secret knowledge, not faith alone. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 AD, was one of the first church fathers to systematically attack Gnostic teachings. His massive work, Against Heresies, spends 5 books dismantling Gnostic beliefs. What's fascinating is that Irenaeus clearly had access to texts like the secret book of John because he summarizes its teachings with surprising accuracy. He calls it blasphemous and absurd, but his very anger reveals how seriously he took the threat. This wasn't fringe superstition. This was a sophisticated theological system that was winning converts, including educated, wealthy Romans who found Gnosticism's cosmic drama more compelling than the church's message. Hippolytus of Rome, writing a few decades later, devoted an entire section of his Refutation of All Heresies to Gnostic teachers. Tertullian in Carthage railed against Gnostic interpretations of Scripture. Origen of Alexandria, himself suspect for some mystical tendencies, still condemned full-blown Gnosticism. Epiphanius of Salamis in the 4th century wrote the Panarion, or medicine chest, claiming to provide antidotes to 80 different heresies, many of them Gnostic. Why such sustained, intense opposition? Because Gnosticism threatened the very foundation of institutional Christianity. Consider what the church was building in the 2nd and 3rd centuries: a hierarchical structure with bishops, priests, and deacons, standardized scriptures, creeds that defined correct belief, rituals like baptism and Eucharist that required ordained clergy. Gnosticism undermined all of it. If salvation came through direct mystical knowledge, who needed bishops? If the Creator God was evil, why follow Old Testament law or read Hebrew scriptures? If the material world was irredeemably corrupt, why would God become incarnate in flesh? Why would Jesus' physical death matter? Some Gnostic texts, like the Apocalypse of Peter, another Nag Hammadi discovery, depict Jesus on the cross laughing because what's being crucified is just a physical shell. The real Christ stands beside Peter, watching, explaining that those who crucify the body cannot touch the true divine spirit. This is why the secret book of John was so dangerous. It offered an alternative Christian narrative that was intellectually sophisticated, emotionally compelling to people who experience the material world as suffering, and completely incompatible with the church's emerging orthodoxy. But here's what made it especially threatening. It claimed apostolic authority. John, the beloved disciple, receiving secret teachings directly from the risen Christ. How could church leaders claim their interpretation was correct if the apostles themselves had taught differently to inner circles of initiates? The political dimension can't be ignored. When Constantine converted to Christianity in 312 AD and began favoring the church, Christianity transformed from a persecuted minority religion into an imperial faith. The Nicene Creed in 325 AD standardized belief. Church councils condemned various heresies. By 380 AD, Theodosius I made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. In this environment, diversity of belief became sedition. Gnosticism wasn't just theologically incorrect, it was politically dangerous. Books were burned, teachers were exiled, communities were scattered. But some believers, probably monks from a nearby monastery at Chenoboskion, couldn't bring themselves to destroy their sacred texts. Sometime in the late 4th century, they sealed 13 codices in a jar and buried them near a cliff face at Nag Hammadi. There, the secret book of John slept for 16 centuries, while Christianity developed without any memory of the fierce debates that had raged in its earliest centuries. When scholars finally translated the Nag Hammadi library in the 1960s and 70s, it revolutionized our understanding of early Christianity. We suddenly had primary sources from groups we'd only known through their opponents' polemics. It would be like reconstructing what Democrats believed based solely on Republican attack ads, then suddenly finding Democratic Party documents. The secret book of John revealed a Christian movement that was far more diverse, far more philosophically complex, and far more widespread than anyone had imagined. Modern readers encountering the text for the first time often find it bizarre. The cosmology is intricate, with multiple levels of divine emanations, complex naming systems for angels and archons, and creation myths that seem to blend Platonic philosophy, Jewish mysticism, and Christian theology into something entirely new. But reading it in context, you can sense what attracted ancient believers. It explained suffering. If the material world is a prison created by an ignorant false god, then pain, injustice, and death aren't God's will or punishment for sin. They're features of a broken system. It offered empowerment. You aren't a wretched sinner dependent on institutional mediation for salvation. You're a divine being who's forgotten your true nature, and Gnosis can wake you up. It promised transformation. Through knowledge and spiritual practice, you could transcend the limitations of flesh and return to the pleroma, the realm of light. Some scholars see Gnosticism as Christianity's mystical tradition, what it might have become if different teachers had won the theological battles. Others see it as a separate religion entirely that incorporated Christian elements into a fundamentally different worldview. The debate continues. What's undeniable is that for centuries, millions of people found the secret book of John and similar texts spiritually nourishing, worth copying, worth preserving, worth dying for. The legacy persists in unexpected ways. Medieval Cathar and Bogomil movements show Gnostic influences. Islamic mystical traditions, especially Ismaili thought, echo Gnostic themes. Modern esoteric movements from theosophy to New Age spirituality draw on rediscovered Gnostic texts. The Gnostic Jesus appears in novels like The Da Vinci Code, comic books, and science fiction. The Matrix trilogy is basically Gnostic theology dressed in leather and sunglasses. Reality is a simulation. Humans are enslaved by machine archons. The one must wake people up through knowledge. Transcendence comes through seeing through the illusion. But strip away the pop culture and modern appropriations, and you're left with a profound historical question. What did we lose when the secret book of John was suppressed? Not just one text, but an entire way of understanding Christianity that emphasized mystical experience over doctrinal conformity, individual spiritual transformation over institutional authority, cosmic liberation over moral improvement. Whether you find Gnostic teachings compelling or heretical or simply strange, their suppression reminds us that history is written by winners. For every text that survived, how many were destroyed? For every voice preserved, how many were silenced? The farmer Muhammad Ali, who discovered the Nag Hammadi library, died in the 1980s. He never knew the full significance of what he'd found. The pages his mother burned might have contained texts we'll never recover, teachings we'll never know, questions we'll never be able to ask. But what survived is enough to permanently change how we understand Christian origins. The faith wasn't a monolith from the beginning. It was a cacophony of competing voices, brilliant teachers offering radically different visions of what following Jesus meant. The secret book of John terrified early church leaders because it revealed that Jesus' message could be interpreted in ways that fundamentally challenged their authority and their theology. They succeeded in burying it for 1,500 years. But here's the beautiful irony. By trying to erase it, they guaranteed we'd never know with certainty what the earliest Christians really believed. Every time a scholar opens the secret book of John, every time someone reads its strange, beautiful prose about the divine Mother-Father, the prison of matter, and the spark of light within every human, those ancient believers win a small victory. Their voice echoes across the centuries, saying, "There was another way. We existed, we believed, and our story matters." The text ends where it began, with John returning from his mystical encounter, transformed, ready to share what he's learned with his fellow disciples. The secret book of John wasn't meant to be scripture for the masses. It was initiation literature meant for those ready to move beyond simple faith into deeper mysteries. That's why it was secret, why it circulated in closed communities, why church fathers worked so hard to suppress it. They understood something crucial. Ideas have power. Stories shape reality. And this story, this vision of cosmic rebellion, divine knowledge, and human potential, was too powerful to coexist with the Christianity they were building. Whether the church fathers were protecting truth from dangerous error or suppressing liberating wisdom to maintain institutional control depends on your perspective. History rarely offers simple villains and heroes. What remains is the text itself, available now to anyone with internet access, no longer secret, no longer dangerous to political power, but still strange, still challenging, still asking the same questions it asked in the 2nd century. Who are you really? Where did you come from? Where are you going? And who told you that this material world of suffering and death is all there is? If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey into forgotten history with me. If Professor Archive's deep dives into the stories mainstream history overlooks resonate with you, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And seriously, if you found value in this, a super thanks genuinely makes a difference in keeping this channel going. The story of suppressed knowledge of ideas too dangerous for their time continues. There are more forgotten gospels, more lost voices, more questions worth asking. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history is always stranger than we're taught.